Ancient Greek philosopher Plato once said, "Those who tell the stories rule the world." Many of the legends of leadership were also legendary storytellers. Imagine Abraham Lincoln, for example, a true storytelling master. As a great admirer of George Washington, Lincoln loved to tell the story about Washington and another American Revolutionary War hero, Ethan Allen. After the war, many of the British felt humbled and disgruntled, and to show their scorn for General George Washington, the man behind their degrading defeat, they hung across the nation portraits of Washington in their outhouses as a sign of disrespect. One day, when Ethan Allen was visiting the British Empire shortly after the end of the war, a group of mischievous Englishmen were eager to see Allen's reaction when he went out to use the outhouse. When he returned, they asked him, "So, what did you think of the portrait hanging behind the head?" Allen smiled broadly and said, "Well, I think it's just the thing. After all, nothing made an Englishman crap so fast as the sight of General George Washington." As much as Lincoln enjoyed storytelling, were these stories just for entertainment, or can the right story change the course of history? I'm Johnny Welch. Welcome to Leadership Lessons from the Legends. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the power of storytelling, including 3 key purposes of storytelling, as well as a 7-step storytelling formula from Lincoln. Harvard's Howard Gardner said that stories are the single most powerful weapon in a leader's arsenal. But just how is storytelling such a powerful part of leadership? There are 3 key ways. First, stories are tools of persuasion. Lincoln learned early in life to avoid provoking people or arguing to win his way. He was once reflecting with Chauncey Depew on some sharp criticism that he received about all this storytelling. And he said, "They say I tell a great many stories," Lincoln said, "and I reckon I do, but I have found from long experience that common people, take them as they run, are more easily influenced and informed through the medium of a broad illustration than in any other way. And as to what the hypercritical few may think, I don't care." What's more, studies show that when information is presented as a fact, people adopt a critical mindset. Defenses are up. However, research also reveals that when information is presented through a story, people are more open and receptive, and defenses are lowered, and communication can occur more naturally. Second, not only do we love to be entertained and love entertainers, but stories can be a compelling way to connect. Lincoln understood that sharing stories is the shortest path from strangers to friends. Carl Schurz, a German-born revolutionary and later a Union general and then a U.S. senator, described meeting Lincoln for the first time on a train, and he said, quote, "I soon felt as if I'd known him all my life, and we had very long been close friends. He interspersed our conversations with all sorts of quaint stories, each of which had a witty point applicable to the subject in hand." Third, stories have the power to bring change. The stories we choose communicate a deeper meaning, our values and hopes and ideals, in a way in which people can relate. Stories help us to see what is and imagine what could be and what should be. Of course, stories are also easier to remember and repeat, which is crucial to building a movement or leading change. As president, Lincoln had the reputation for being a storyteller, but he said it was not the story that mattered. "It is not the story itself, but its purpose or effect that interests me," Lincoln said. "I often avoid a long and useless discussion by others or a laborious explanation on my own part by a short story that illustrates my point of view. So too, the sharpness of a refusal or the edge of a rebuke may be blunted by an appropriate story, so as to save wounded feelings and yet serve the purpose. No," he said, "I am not simply a storyteller, but storytelling as an emollient saves me much friction and distress. I do not seek applause nor to amuse people. I want to convince them." And convince them he did. Lincoln's opponent in 1860 was fully intimidated by Lincoln's prowess as a storyteller. "There is one thing," Stephen Douglas said, "of which I stand constantly in dread. When Lincoln begins to tell a story, I begin to get apprehensive. Every one of his stories seems like a whack upon my back. And that is exactly the effect that the allegories and anecdotes of which he is a master have upon me. Nothing else, not any of his arguments or any of his replies to my questions disturbs me. But when he begins to tell a story, I feel that I am to be overmatched. The single most effective, time-tested strategy that leaders can use to pull people together for change is storytelling. Stories are the language of change leadership. Harvard Business School professor John Carter said, "Over the years, I have become convinced that we learn best and change from hearing stories that strike a chord within us. Those in leadership positions who fail to grasp the use or the power of stories risk failure for their companies and for themselves." So clearly, storytelling is a powerful tool for leaders, for anyone. But just what makes a story work? Here are 7 steps to telling a story well. First, grab your audience's attention immediately with a hook, something relevant to the audience or the situation. Frequently, Lincoln, in the middle of a conversation, would say simply, "That reminds me of a story." And actually, the word story itself is a trigger that sparks interest. Alternatively, you could begin with a bold opening or an unusual situation, a mystery, or a metaphor, or a question, or simply introduce a main character. Second, establish relevance. The story has to be audience-centered. It must apply to them. Or better still, make it so they can relate to the character or the situation on some level. This gets back to the leader's purpose. It's never solely about entertaining. Lincoln always had a relevant point because he was trying to persuade. Third, once you have their attention, you have to keep them engaged. First, by keeping it short, but also by building anticipation. You can do this by building up the characters a little bit or sharing new relevant facts about them. You can also share only partial information as the story unfolds, like clues and facts that keep them guessing. Fourth, good stories have some conflict, a battle or an obstacle, a challenge or a chase. Without conflict, there really is no story. Fifth, engage and heighten the emotions of your audience. Don't be shy. Bring in a little drama. This is where Lincoln really shined. He loved to act out his stories. He would frequently stand and use his body and his voice to take on the characters, and his audiences loved it. Sixth, the best stories are resolved with a surprise, something unexpected. If the ending is too predictable, it loses some of its impact. Stories are valued most when people feel that they walk away with an insight or a lesson learned. Let me say that again. Stories are valued most when people feel like they walk away with an insight or a lesson learned. Finally, have a call to action. Like Lincoln said, leaders don't tell stories simply to entertain. They want to accomplish something. Be clear about what your goal is, whether it is to connect with people or persuading people to your cause or just sharing a product or service that you believe will help people. Just make sure that the story supports the call to action. Well, that's it for this episode of Leadership Lessons from the Legends. If you're interested in other resources on leadership, be sure to get on our email list at leadershiplessonsfromthelegends.com. And for news and updates, you can follow me on Twitter, Johnny Welch.